Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. It's good to see you in the house for Educating the Black Child. I'm Candace Wicks Davis, the founding partner of Edutainment for Equity, and we are back educating the Black child. So, y'all are in for a treat today. I don't even know if you're ready, but you in for like something truly special this morning. A little bit about us. Edutainment for Equity provides transformative and innovative experiences. We do that through trainings, professional development, arts production, and events like this one, Educating the Black Child. Let's keep it moving. So this event, we've been doing this event, if you can believe it, we've been doing it for about 6 years now. And really it started out of a desire to create a space for folks to get together and think about how we are going to prepare our children for the future and how we can help to shape and craft the education systems so that our children can have success. And so we started this event a while back, really just convening scholars. So you'll see at the bottom all these like really superstar educators, fantastic individuals who have done, actual work within education as well as being experts in the field. And so we are, continuing to convene folks to pull their expertise out so that all of us can really learn from each other and create the model that we need in order to educate our children into the future. So respect to all those people down there. We always like to start off with an indigenous land acknowledgement. We here in the Bay Area, we are on Ohlone land. And we want to acknowledge that. We want to acknowledge the people who were here for centuries, who built families, who had societies, who lived and died here, and who have not been erased. We will not allow their legacy to be erased from this land. And so, wherever you are, if you can type in the chat, whose land are you on? What indigenous people um, used to be on the land that you live on? And go ahead and type in the chat the name of those people because we don't ever want to forget them. We always want to remember. We always want to acknowledge the folks who were here before us, long before us, whose people are here, whose spirits are in the land and in the water and in the air. Thank you. Thank you for dropping those things in the chat. Thank you. We also have to acknowledge the ancestors, those that have come before us, who have paved the way for us, many of whom have sacrificed even their lives for us. And we always want to make sure that we acknowledge the Egun. We want to make sure that we pay homage to them. And so if you can also drop in the chat an ancestor's name that you want to bring into the space today. Whose energy do you want to carry forth into today with you? And drop their name in the chat. Just want to acknowledge that we have Tupac here, who just had a birthday, Cicely Tyson, who also passed recently. I have John Lewis and Maya Angelou, and they were Black children. They were Black children at one time. So this conversation is super important, super critical. Think of who these people are going to be that you're working with, that you're here to gain some expertise around. So drop a name of an ancestor in the chat that you want to bring into this space. And let's acknowledge them and thank them for allowing us to become and for all of the things that they've done, for the blood, if they're blood relatives, the blood that's pulsating through our veins. If they're not blood relatives, the legacy that they've left behind that makes it so that you are here today. And I also want us to think about ourselves when we become ancestors. What is the legacy that we want to leave? We want to be brave. Do we want to be courageous? What's the legacy we want to leave behind so that our children and grandchildren and great grandchildren and the young people who are going to be taking on leadership, who do we want them to remember us as well? So thank you all for that. Thank you all for sharing your ancestors with us this morning. Um, I want to open up the space for my partner I don't want to say partner in crime because we don't be committing crimes and the way that, we just don't want that language. But I want to welcome Hadari, who is going to be our MC for today, to help to start by just kind of sharing with us what we're going to be talking about today, and then to introduce our incredible special guest that we're having today. And I don't know if you're ready, so I'm just going to go on and pass it on to you, Hadari.
Right on. Don't click off yet. Before you click off, check out my wife, y'all. She's fly. She be killing the game. She's a great trainer and leader of community, and really working hard to combat racism throughout the Bay Area, throughout organizations in the Bay Area, to stand in solidarity with so many different people who are stepping into this new challenge of really trying to be optimistic about racial justice, racial empowerment, and needing coaching, needing guidance, needing mentorship, or just needing a partner, a thought partner, somebody who they can share ideas with, share frustrations with, perhaps get some strategy, some tips, some skills. So, you know, sometimes we rush through this moment of transition in our event, and I don't do the thing of like really acknowledging the work that Candace is doing, and encourage all of you to encourage others to connect with her, connect with this anti-racist initiative, connect with Edutainment for Equity. You know, our organization exists to support you. And her work as the CEO of our organization, she champions that. Uh, she 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 promotes that the importance of our organization playing a role in the lives of others, of our organization, helping others be the best that they can possibly be. And so thank you, Candace, for transitioning. And thank you for the work that you're doing. And educating the Black child is a real reflection of that work and intention. Before we get into our guest, Karega Bailey, if you're here, you know a little bit about his work. We're going to do a lot today to kind of interrogate it, hopefully in a way that can add to our practices, add to our understanding, add to our vision of the future. But before we do that, you know, as we always do, we like to contextualize where we are, where this conversation around Black children is. And this first statistic is just critical when we think about the deaths that have happened. We think about the toll of the pandemic. This is something that we have to think about, that children make up a lot of the deaths. That not only have children died, but they've had parents, grandparents, neighbors, coaches, teachers, etc. People who are important in their lives pass away. And so they're not just coming with the grief of perhaps losing peers or losing siblings, but they also there's the grief that they're coming back to school with from the tremendous loss that has happened in Black, Latinx, and Indigenous communities, gun deaths. So, you know, we see what's going on in the news today around initiatives around guns. It's just important to recognize that although we hear a lot about mass murder, we hear a lot about gun death, usually the face of gun death is usually a white shooter and a white victim, in unless we're talking about police violence or something. But it's important to remember that African American children die from gun deaths at a higher rate than any other group of children in the United States. It's just important to consider that when we're thinking about the future of Black children, about educating Black children. Here's an example of kind of the intersectionality of some of these issues. In February, a young girl at the age of 9 was handcuffed and pepper sprayed in the back of a car because the police said that they could not control her behavior. And that's just something to think about, that a 9-year-old girl can be considered a criminal, and she can be considered hostile, a threat, to the point where you feel like, where these police officers felt like they needed not only to handcuff her, but also to use chemical deterrent. Um, it's just something to think about when we're thinking about educating Black children. This is how that plays out in schools, how that kind of policing culture and criminalization of our youth plays out in schools in the form of suspensions and expulsions. And anybody who's familiar with the nature of discipline in schools in the United States, you know that there's tremendous disparities between what Black students experience and what their white peers experience. We also know that there's disparities in terms of achievement that often are directly related to these disparities in discipline. And sometimes these disparities are exacerbated by the approach that the institutions take to discipline. So it's not that the student behavior in a white school is different from a student behavior in an indigenous school or a student behavior in a Black school. It's just that the manner in which discipline is approached, sort of the way in which the students are labeled, how they are seen, how their behavior is categorized and criminalized, is what leads to these kinds of outcomes. And this is a lot about what we'll be talking about today. This is a statistic about the projected impact of learning loss, what they're calling learning loss due to COVID-19. Now, to me, it's interesting, this particular chart, because it's not fact. This is a forecast. This is a projection that due to school closures, there would be learning loss in mathematics and learning loss in reading. What's interesting about this statistic to me is that a lot of times, even without the pandemic, we see these same results, that there's learning loss. You know, without the pandemic, we still see children who are in third and fourth grade who can't read at grade level. We're still seeing students who are in math 3 and 4 grades behind, and that was before the pandemic. So when you add, you know, so this idea of learning loss as being this great albatross in education is, it's an interesting conversation to be having now, relative to the fact that African American children have been dealing with learning loss since the integration of American schools. Here's Gavin Newsom talking about safely reopening schools. This is the priority. This will be happening in the fall. They're not quite sure what the reopening is going to look like, but they are sure that they're going to reopen. So that means that the issues about the safety of educators, the safety of the children, kind of management with regard to the pandemic, but also management of a lot of relationships and a lot of interactions that were based on ways of being that are no longer consistent with how we live today. So it's just another thing to think about. And in that, before we get there, I don't know how that happened. Before we get there, I just want to give you this image of like this. These are schools in China where they've already grown accustomed to wearing masks. You know, they have this funky, playful headgear that they're wearing. They're not quite doing the social distancing, but this is kind of to give you a sense of what the schools of the future may look like for our children. And we just want to think about what impact that has on the already existing problems in the relationship between schools and Black children. Masks don't contribute to less criminalization, for example. Concerns about discipline and safety often fall into the sphere and responsibility of police officers. For Black children, that means something very different than for these young people in this photograph. The sticks on their head keep them distanced, but I don't think that we're going to put. I'm not sure that schools are intending to put this many young people in the same class, and these sticks don't keep them 6 feet apart. But that's a whole other conversation. So this conversation, educating the Black child, we're really interested in the future. And we're saying that whether with or without the pandemic, that there need to be some dramatic changes in the way that Black children are educated, in the way that they're seen, in the way that possibility is envisioned for them within the education system, both in schools and of course outside of schools. The majority of the folks we talk to in this conversation our focus is a little less about schools and more about the interactions that youth development professionals are having with young people. So we're going to use the insight in this conversation about schools, about school discipline, about the way discipline policies happen, about trauma-centered versus healing-centered practices and pedagogy. We're going to talk about all that. But for you and the audience, I just want you to be thinking about this less in the context of the school system and more in the context of the educational spaces that you lead, the educational programs that you direct, the educational experiences that you facilitate for young people. How much do you adopt these policies? How tied are you to this past of treating young people punitively? And what strategies can you develop, can you learn in order to be more effective as a manager of Black children? So we're going to start with this, with our guest. This particular song by Soul Development, which is the band that our guest is a lead voice of. And this particular piece kind of contextualizes not only the work that Soul Development does towards healing, but also provides some visual and sonic context for the work of Karega Bailey. I've probably talked too much about it already, but here it is.
Peace to all, be free. You now tune into WRBG Soul Development Radio. You already know I'm the legendary DJ Real Talk, and this next joint is called Sweet Freedom.
How could I choose to be silent and say I care about it? I raise my voice to raise awareness till they hear about it. Until they speak about it, read about it, be about it. And do they part to get my people about them cocoa farms? If you say silent, then you only choose to do more harm. I'm speaking words of freedom in the lines of every song. My people need them, we won't stop till ain't no slaves at all. Cause if I'm free and you ain't free, then we ain't free at all. You gotta evolve and get involved, I am my brother's keeper. And greedy companies exploit the kids because it's cheaper. I challenge every artist with a voice to choose to speak up. If we unite, we manifest anything that we speak of.
Bitter with the sweet, it's so much bigger than you and me. So much better when we're free, when we come together. Freedom never tastes so good. Sweet taste of freedom. Freedom never tastes so good. Sweet taste of freedom.
Yo, there's a war going on outside and it ain't safe, but it's hard to keep the faith when the pistol is in your face and the finger on the trigger that just might control your fate. First they shot us while we marched, then they bombed us while we prayed, stole our bodies, then beat our bodies to be somebody's slave, made a killing off of the living that forced us in the grave. Fast forward today, niggas ain't scared to die. Some of us will escape and others too scared to try. Many of us will weep and others too hurt to cry. If you gangster about your freedom, now's the time to mobilize. Libya to India and every prison bump between. If they ain't free, then you ain't free. Don't let them sell you no false dream.
Take the bitter with the sweet. It's so much bigger than you and me. So much better when we're free, when we come together. Freedom never tastes so good. Sweet taste of freedom. Freedom never tastes so good. Sweet taste of freedom.
I mean, how do you know that there's a social problem to which you can be a change agent and walk away from that opportunity? And I know that that fight isn't separate from the fight we fight here in the States every day. We're talking about educating children to give them access to opportunities, something that I stand by and do every day. But how do I not then have the ability to not just see my students or the young folks in my community, but the young folks home in the motherland, continental Africa? I couldn't imagine not taking responsibility. I couldn't imagine not taking an invitation to be a part of a social change.
Peace to all, be
So we're going to be talking about restoring justice. We're going to be talking about healing-centered pedagogy and practices. and the role that they play not only in the life of an educator, but also the role that they play in the lives of the young people that we're educating. We're in a time when we have to step up, and restorative justice provides the structure and healing so we can actually grapple with what's going on without losing ourselves in the process. That's a quote from Dr. Maisha Wynn, and we want to welcome Karega Bailey, artist, activist, author, educator, husband, father, storyteller, to this conversation. Brother Karega, where are you at? Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Right here, present. The technology is dialed in. The video is on. Mic is on. Is the video still on? Have I appeared yet?
We good. You good. We're so happy to have you here. We feel honored, to be able to share share our community member with the world. Give folks a sense of the work that you've been doing, and maybe an opportunity to see themselves in your work. And I wanted to go to the book Restorative Justice in Education, which just came out maybe a month ago.
Yeah.
We talked about this book when we had Maisha Wynn and Lawrence Wynn here, I think in February. This book had not been released yet, and we were encouraging everybody to get it. And it turns out Chapter 8, Building Queens and Kings, the restructuring of identity through transformative and restorative justice, was co-authored by Brian Brown and by Karega Bailey. And this particular chapter is a great analysis, an example of how restorative justice works, like how it actually works. And I think what I loved about the chapter is how it captured you in the moment. Like, it wasn't you reflecting in the past. It was like you in real time. So can we talk about that? Like, how did you become a restorative justice practitioner? What was it that moved you to become an educator, period?
Hadari, thank you for having me. Candace, Edutainment for Equity, thank y'all for creating this space. The question you asked is, how did I come to this work? How did I come to being a restorative justice practitioner, transformative justice practitioner? Before answering that question, I have to acknowledge the audience that we have here. Thank you for being present. Thank you for making this space so. And I also want to thank your family that lends you to the work. If you are reporting to this space virtually, I'm imagining that there is somebody who is helping you be present if you have a family. Somebody's taking a shift or a lead. If you have a partner who is stepping up in a space where you aren't present because you're here, I want to acknowledge all those people that lend us to this space. That's my lens, Hadari. Like, we do not exist singularly. We do not exist as an individual. I think that when we start, I understand individual choices, behavior, psychology, but belongingness is so much more critically important to me than the individual separate. We all belong. We all belong somewhere. We all belong to somebody. We were all at one point somebody's baby. When we look at the lives that show up in community in ways that maybe are at times unfavorable or cause harm, it's really easy to otherize those people, except for the fact that that's somebody's baby who grew to be this adult version of themselves. And we have to dare ourselves to want to engage in a complete picture, which means, who are you? What are the experiences that shaped you to be this way? Because if I am for educating the Black child, I cannot look at adults separate from their whole psyche, their whole present, right? And it's where some of our wounds are. So yeah, I think I come to this work by, first things first, I have 8 brothers and sisters. So that was my first construct of the center of what is most important to the family is not exclusively what I desire. I learned that early. I didn't understand how that informed my work, But when I went on to college, I went to Hampton and I studied sociology, right? And the first thing I remember about Hampton was how expensive it was and the guilt that I experienced at how expensive college was. And at the time, it was more than what my parents earned. So I thought to myself, I better be absorbing this information with, with, with the ability, though, with the ability to hand it off to my people, right? So these inform. So that's how I came into the scope of like this higher learning. And after sociology, I observed several systems. At the time, I worked in group homes. I worked in juvenile halls. Um, and the freedom that I was imagining couldn't be attained in those systems.
That's right.
So when I was in the juvenile hall, I remember being buzzed in, right? And it did not escape me that in that moment, I wasn't trustworthy to the system, which is why they had to check me the way they did. I represented an outside agency. So in order for me to do the work of liberation, I had to be incarcerated temporarily, right? So that was registering as something that was unsustainable for me. Young 20-something Karega says, I can't keep going behind bars every day and feeling free. I can't keep going behind bars every day and talking to them about a freedom that is just conceptual because we are behind bars for this moment. Then, so that was a juvenile hall. When I was in the group home, it helped me develop empathy for the students who did not have family the same way other students in the schools had family, because I would have to be the advocate of some of the residents in the group home. And I saw how nuanced their experiences were, and I saw the extent of some of the broken hearts of disappointment, of family visits not working, or the court not appointing your visit, or somebody going in your drawer and touching your belongings, your socks, your underwear, like this inability to conceive safety. I saw what that looked like all through the clock. So I came in an undergrad experience of sociology. I worked in group homes and juvenile halls. And I asked myself, where does Black liberation lie? Where does healing? So it made sense that I first entered this spectrum of healing from a self-identity. Yes, I did. So that is, I saw myself and other Black males as somebody who I immediately wanted to engage with, because I entered on the spectrum of self. And the question I asked is, where does the pivot, where does the access point lie on the greatest access to young people? And I realized the law only required young people to go two places. And this is really all in undergrad. Only required them to go two places: schools or jails, right? There was the only legal mandate. You had to go to school or you had to go to jail. So I chose education. Special education chose me, right? I entered the place of education through a program that is in need of much refining, as they are trying. But I came in through Teach for America because I was a sociology major. All right. That experience is a whole other conversation we can have. But I'm keeping it a buck. I'm keeping it a buck. Everything is drawn. But I say it like this: special education chose me. You make a choice on what fields you want to study. Special education was the last choice on my priority list, and it chose me. And when I realized that it put me at a special education, special intersection of the Black child, right? The Black child who I find to be so gifted and so valuable, but I saw how systems dehumanize their families, dehumanize their experiences. So that's how I found myself in restorative justice. I was a special education teacher, and I would advocate for solutions other than suspension when I was in DCPS. And they liked me until my probing for alternatives became problematic to the system, right? And now I represent the problem because I just won't let things be as they are. But in the case of my exceptional learners, I needed them invested and close to my learning space. I didn't need them far and removed. I knew that they were world standard deviations, so many standard deviations away from what the culture was of my classroom and the safety it created. I didn't want them gone long term, but the system offered no interim solution. So after my time in the classroom, I was on the streets of Northeast and Southeast DC. My school was on the Southeast side. The other school was Maya Angelou on the Northeast side. And I extended my zone of like supervision. So I came earlier so I can get a better observation of what was about to come into the school. Right? From like just take like a social epidemiology lens. I want to go walk the streets. I want to go figure out what's coming to the building before it gets to the building. So I learned the walk patterns. I learned to follow the clouds of smoke that I saw in the air. Right? I want to inquire on what has them the needing to smoke this early before I even criminalize it. What makes you carry this weight this early? Right? Let me ask that question. Let me offer hand sanitizer. Right? You're not bringing any substance in the building. Well, let me not create a friction point, because see, that's as early as conflict could exist. I am here and I'm being rejected already. So now it's time for me to flip tables, fight security guards, because all this could happen before instruction even happened. And I saw that to be a detriment to the learning. So I just made myself available sooner and on both sides of the streets, getting to know all the students until I became somebody they saw as trustworthy. I was building strands of trust, right? Presence is profound. So I have to be available. And then that work extended the opportunity where there was a position opening across the street. The young brother at the time, young brother to me, I didn't know that I was talking to Grap Lover the whole time, right? So this is Grap Lover, the legendary hip hop producer, MC. Grap was working across the street, and me and Grap both did the morning patrol, right? And he was like, yo, they got a position opening up in the building. I'm like, word? He's like, yeah, they looking for like a dean. And he knew that I was in grad school when I was just finishing my master's, right? He's like, yo, you should go for it. And I apply to be the dean of students across the street at Maya Angelou Public Charter. I'm young. I go into the interview. I don't know anybody. There's no nepotism. But the director at the time, her name was Dr. Whitehood. I met her 2 years prior. One of my students transferred to that school, and he was up for an expulsion hearing, okay? And he needed a mentor to come in as a character reference. So he calls me. When they thought he was calling a mentor, they thought they was calling somebody, somebody from around his way. He was calling his previous teacher, who he believed saw the best in him. So he invited me in as his advocate. I scheduled that meeting on my lunch break. Dr. Whitehead at the time asked, who are you? And I said, I'm his previous teacher. And he says, wait, you're his previous teacher, still committed to his learning? I said, absolutely. It's the bond that we built. And I remember she remembered that. She thought that was an outstanding quality. So 2 years later, when I come across the street, I didn't even know she was there. I'm interviewing with the principals and the other directors, but she is the senior director. And I become a dean at 24 at Maya Angelou Public Charter. That's how I come to the space.
That's a fantastic story. I think there's so much in that story. And Candace has been kind of dropping little quotes, little gems from what you said. But one that stood out to me was really about how you were made a practitioner, that you didn't study and then become a practitioner, that you actually learned some of that practice just from your upbringing. And I think that that's really important kind of peculiarity about the experience of Black children in schools. We learn how to restore the justice within ourselves. If we're going to be successful, we have to figure out how to heal, how to navigate, how to understand context, where people are coming from. Like, we have to do all that work, whether in first grade or in high school. We got to do all that work, the same work that you were doing, walking the same street that the kids are walking to get to the program. You also pointed out kind of a relationship between restorative justice and the criminal justice system. Yep. And I think that that's really a critical kind of point, a pivot point for schools who are trying to move away from school to prison pipeline, a pivot point for organizations who are trying not to contribute to the pipeline. This idea of restorative justice in education. And there's a quote in your chapter. It said, restorative justice is rooted in 3 vital steps: identifying participants' humanity, which you talked about, asking for their accountability, and redirecting and empowering those involved to take on a new role. And I think that just that quote is really powerful because punitive discipline extracts people from the institution, from society, from the norm, places them in this detention space, which obscures rehabilitation. In the meantime, the community or the institution continues to operate in the same ways it was operating before this person was extracted. And sometimes this extraction is like, the kid was violent, the kid was defiant, the kid talked back, all the things that you would do if you were resisting an oppressive system. And rather than and you said, you were like, I don't want to criminalize you for smoking weed before school. I want to understand why you're smoking weed, which is such a different paradigm shift, because in the school, it's like extract that child. So now none of the reasons why the child smokes before school are even addressed. It's just extract that child, and then this so-called problem no longer exists. But the problem still exists. So most research shows that traditional forms of discipline actually exacerbate bullying, exacerbate violence, exacerbate poor academic performance, decrease in social and emotional health. So this is like what the research shows. This is from Erica Niles, who wrote this in Education Week, teacher. She's a scholar herself, and she's just saying, the research demonstrates that punitive discipline in schools doesn't work, that it actually exacerbates the things that we don't want. But yet, it's probably easier because the model that's been set is a model out of the justice system. So it's probably easier to just copy and paste as opposed to innovate, which is what you were talking about, right? Like you were coming with, why don't we try this? Why don't we try that? And they're like, dude, you offering too many ideas. Why don't we just do what's written on the Xerox? So talk about how you got to roses, brother. Talk about.
Beautiful. I first giving thanks and honor to my young people in DC who taught me so much and continue to still teach me so much. But my time at Maya Angelou Public Charter was profound. But I also experienced such loss. I was experiencing gun violence differently than I had in any other space. There was so much grief, so much funerals. And if we just revisit, when I asked them why they're smoking like that before the way to school, and then I learned the stories of their fallen comrades, and they're still walking past the memorial spot, and the teddy bear shrines are growing, and the liquor bottle shrines are growing, and they are navigating adverse territories because this specialized school that's not specialized at all is in the middle of somebody else's hood. And they're very aware of the hood politics that these young people have to travel to just to get to school, to be told at the door that you can't come in. So now you got me in the ops territory. No, when we reckon right here, right now, right? And I got tired of that happening at the beginning of the day because it wasn't sustainable for anyone, right? And it made a criminal narrative around the young people just develop further and further. The more we had to call MPD, I didn't like that setting. I didn't know what liberation could be attained there. That is DC's framework. The young people taught me. They were also my first mentors in grief. We'll talk about it more, but grief is a very sacred experience. And after you go through several challenges of it, you're able to articulate and understand that grief is love. But my young people in DC were my first grief mentors. After I had learned about their lives and watched them take their losses, June 13th, 2014, I lost my brother to gun violence. I got a call. We were inside my office. I got a grant. They're in the Bay Area. I didn't know them, but the Pollination Project. I got a grant with the Pollination Project, and I was having a mobile recording studio come to the school, and we were doing narrative therapy. Right? We can't be Maya Angelou Public Charter and not give the students narrative therapy. So we were rocking after school with some of the most truant students. They were staying longer than any other time to record, right? So we were having the listening party in my office when I got the call from my eldest brother, the brother right above me transition. This all contextualizes. So then I'm in DC. I want to be closer to my family in California, but I don't want to intersect with anybody who was responsible for causing that harm to my brother, because I didn't trust myself, right? I didn't trust myself that I could see a family name or last name and not just go. Again, I get a call from the homie Jeff, right? And he say, we got this opportunity popping off in Oakland, and I don't have nobody else on my depth chart when it comes on to you. I said, well, respect, I'm Jamaican, I'm in DC, I'm good. I'm not coming out there to struggle to find culture. Right? He said, come visit. I came to visit, and he took me to Kingston 11, right? Real funny, right? And I'm like, oh, you got jokes. You got jokes. But this was the work, man, of imagining freedom in a different way. But let us not forget the relationship between autonomy and responsibility. If you really want to pursue freedom, the autonomy is a great responsibility. But I was brought in from DC to help bring the culture and the love to Roses in Concrete. I brought a team with me to do this work through song, because I knew it was impossible to do without culture. So I brought a team with me, man, and this is how we ended up in Oakland. This is how I ended up in your presence. I would also say, with fair reference, in many cases, we'll get to this, but under his wing, in a very non-possessive way. But if you just happen to know the course and you can kind of create the crosswinds for somebody, I would say that Hadari was doing that for me when I didn't even know the crosswinds. So massive love.
Right on. Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade started Roses in Concrete Community School as his baby, as his a manifestation of his own commitment to restorative justice and restorative education. And, like any school, like any community school, like any effort that you initiate in a system that is not for the young people that you're educating, there's challenges that you have to overcome. And the greatest tool that you have in your toolkit are relationships, are human beings, are people. So for those of you organizational leaders who are looking for quality staff, I think what Karega just demonstrated to you is that it's possible to find people. It's possible to recruit people. You have to get your hustle on, your knowledge on. You have to be aware of who looks promising, of whose work looks like something that can be activated in your own community. And then just like an NBA team, I mean, I say this all the time in my consultations with people, but my first question for Karega, if I had seen him in DC, would have been, how much you getting paid, brother? Are you happy at your job? Like, I would have went there. And I encourage you all to do. We need people.
Sorry, and I just want to say this: when they tapped me, unbeknownst to them, they had access to an amazing pool of HBCU educated graduates, right? And that was a totally untapped resource, as I saw out here in California. Like, why y'all not going to the HBCUs and recruiting? We've been doing this, and we do it at such a high level, and people want to get to California. So I brought HBCU grads with me from Miami, right? From DC. I had Howard grads, I had Hampton grads. I brought folks from all over. Like, we getting free or we getting free?
We getting free or are we getting free? Okay, so I have this quote from this book, Restorative Justice. It says, Brother Karega operates beyond the binary. I love that quote. Instead of discussing who was wrong or who needed to apologize, this is in the context of resolving a conflict. Instead of discussing who was wrong or who needed to apologize, every student is provided an opportunity to tell their story. In framing this opportunity, each student is allowed to be understood and perhaps more importantly, hear how their actions impacted the community. Can you talk about that? That's tight. Ooh, that, I mean, I'm telling
Hear
you.
about how their actions impacted their community.
Yeah.
Actions impact their community, meaning they belong.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can't do something to make you unbelong to me because this isn't a term relationship. If I act as a genie who appears at the school and disappears when the bell rings, then yeah, I can disassociate myself from you. But the truth of the matter is we go to the same parks, we go to the same grocery stores, we are part of the same community, right? So I can't disappear you. But the reason why their story is important is we have to humanize all of our babies. Now, to every educator, every practitioner, I don't ask you who you are, like on your resume. The real question I only have for you when I'm doing culture work with you, who are you when you're offended? Because that's the person that you're dealing with. Who are you when you're offended? And then you also have to learn about offense and the debilitating power it has when you choose to step in offense. You no longer are able to function as the person on your resume, right? You not that person anymore. And the work conditions aren't based upon your resume. They're based upon the real-time serving of needs of young people who want to know, can you handle me at my worst? Right? Do you know how to love this part of me? I don't want to show up as a fraction of myself to be loved by you because that work is too hard, right? To constantly have to like segregate myself, that's too much work. So I can only show up as me. But if I see that you aren't able to love me when I show up as me on the days that I don't fit your model, and trust me, you in for a long year, homie. Because I don't trust you. I don't trust you and you don't see me. So I was trained in a setting where students were identified as emotionally disturbed. I say identified as emotionally disturbed. I also just want to understand the power of language. When we talk about at-risk students, I beg of us to ask, at-risk who placed them at risk? Right? So I like to use the language placed at-risk children because when you understand the systems that design the risks and the risks are associated with where you live and what you look like, then you're not at risk, right? You came. And if you know the phenomena of childbirth, that child is here, not at risk. You place that child at risk, right? So we have to investigate the system and indict the system that's creating the risks. But ultimately, the reason why we humanize them and let them tell their story, you learn things about them that makes them vulnerable, and there is an opportunity for trust. For example, one of the students who just hauls off and hits somebody, he's telling you that I understand what Roses is like, but let me tell you about what my neighborhood is like. Oh, so that value of being challenged comes from there, right? Well, I recognize that you come from a space where that is the code. What do we need to do to help you not have that code here? Because we can't have that type of harm here, but we want you here. You belong here. The harm doesn't, but you do.
That's powerful. There's a quote in talking about the incident in this kind of moment that you're describing. It says, Karega offers the standard of adulthood but asks the students to provide reasoning regarding why adults would avoid the focal behavior.
Hey,
that's deep. That's deep, right? Like,
I remember, but I vividly remember this one. I vividly remember because what you can't see on the page is how puffed their chests were when they came in, right? How much I saw them modeling behavior of men, right? Somewhere I saw them modeling a behavior that was not of their age caliber. So I saw that immediately. Say, oh, you are making posture of something you've seen before,
right?
And we couldn't quite capture that. So that's why I asked them about the behavior. So when we're talking about this, comes from the vignette piece, right?
Yeah.
And I'm asking them, have you ever seen grown men playing fighting games? Their answer is no. I asked them if adults played fighting games like slap boxing, what would happen? Somebody would get hurt, right? And they're looking at me and Mr. John. They're looking at giants to them. I'm like, there's no way in the world we could safely play that game without somebody getting hurt.
Right.
And then I asked them if there were adults around when you were playing this game, would they have what would they have done? They said would have broken it up. I said, tell me why. Tell me why, King. The adults are supposed to keep everyone safe. Oh, you better stop leading this circle. Because at that point, I saw what their psyche was, and they were identifying a population who they thought was responsible for keeping everyone safe. Well, let me expand the jurisdiction on who keeps people safe.
Right.
It's not just the adults that do that. It is you first, right? You determine your safety and your neighbor's safety first. Getting them out the idea of the mind that they need to be policed for accountability, right? So, because at some point the adults can become interchangeable with some other outside agency, right? Because they'll all be adults at some point in time. But I don't want to start a system of adult supremacy and adults are right because they're adults. But I will include you in the responsibility of safety because you belong here, but the harmful behavior doesn't. So you and they're looking for belonging because right now everything in their body is telling them they're about to be disassociated, removed. Their previous experience with discipline tell them, oh, snap, I'm in trouble. Now I can't even focus on the restorative justice because I know I'm in trouble this week. And I had a basketball game on Wednesday because this is already in his mind. He got brought in the office on Monday, and now he can't even focus because, damn, his basketball game Wednesday, he's in trouble now. Birthday on Saturday, and it's a wrap, right? I can't connect to a child who's already in Saturday. I need you to be present. But I have to know these things about you and create that safety so you can be present because you belong here.
I feel like what you're illuminating is kind of the practicality of the methodologies within restorative justice. That, you know, when people think about restorative justice, restorative practice, they think about this circle. They think about two people in the middle speaking with each other. But a lot of what you just described provides reason why everyone's sitting in a circle. It provides a function for why two people are looking in each other's eyes. It provides context for even an image like this, or an image like this. It provides an opportunity to see others engaged in community accountability and not just a common disciplinary image would be you sitting opposite this child, you taller than the child smaller, nobody else in the room, the door closed, and you have a concerned look on your face. And the child probably has this
judge, jury, I'm everything.
You're
right?
everything. You're everything, which that's not even how the world works. But it definitely shouldn't be how our educational spaces work. So you mentioned that in your vignette that you were reading, you were like, yeah, King, tell me about X, Y, and Z. And you just threw King out casually. You just was like the casual King. We had Chris Chapman here maybe 2 EBCs ago, and he is leading Kingmakers of Oakland, and he talked about the importance of using the word king, and you've had a whole campaign around kind of reaffirming the identity of young people around this idea of peace and this idea of king. And then in the book, it's like Karega subtly sends the young men a message of identity by referring to them as king. The norms of restorative justice are evident here. Students are asked to be active listeners in their circle, but also challenged to conceive of themselves as adults in their own community. This is a powerful opportunity for third graders. We're talking about third graders, okay? We talking about third graders, all right? We're not talking about high school. This isn't senior kid. We talking about third graders sitting in a restorative justice circle, getting their stories told, listened to, affirmed, and also their identity shifted and transformed through the lens of a restorative educator. So just talk about that. Talk about, because you mentioned it on the side too. You said language.
But listen, I want the adults to see this in real time in an adult and not just like in the child, because sometimes we think of them different than us, but really we're one. What's happening right now is this opportunity to present in this capacity among this community. I just want to say it felt like you were seeing me at my best when I felt at my worst. That's a powerful tool in grace, right? So my language association for my young people is, yeah, everybody wants to be cheered for when they hit the shot. But what you really want to be encouraged is when you miss the shot, right? Or when you mistake the shot. So I choose, it is by choice. I call them this affirming identity when they believe they are in a deficit space. I call them on who they are and not just about their actions. Because in so much of our school systems, students are relegated to their actions and not who they are, because nobody's taking time for that part. But we started every morning with an affirmation so they can know what they can be, who they are, and what they can achieve that day. This language of king and queen, it 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 begged of a chance just to be spoken. I heard so many other colloquialisms derived from pop culture, hip hop culture. I can't even say hip hop culture respectfully, because it is. I am not disassociating what has happened to the movement, but I'm just saying like that's not the culture. That's the evidence of a violation of culture, an insurgent, right? Like somebody planted that. But I saw all these negative, harmful language association happening, and I was just trying to call them back to their goodness, right? Remember your goodness. And for me, the Peace King movement, this was the album I was working on when my brother transitioned. I remember how hard it was for me to even think that I was worthy of saying Peace King, because the harm that I had in my heart didn't see anybody as a king. I felt most vulnerable around Black men. I didn't know who took my brother's life, and I didn't feel safe or trustworthy. I remember this intersection of, and it was at this time that God also gave me the redirection that said, I will grant you peace if you keep me king. So my peace was the crown. Peace of mind is worth its weight in gold, right? And we know that when our classrooms don't have it, when our schools don't have it. But the peace that I was afforded, it then became my responsibility to give invitation to that same peace model if you're going through something you can't solve within yourself. So Peace King became this greeting and this identity to restore, call them back to their goodness, but it also became a pathway. If you feel overwhelmed, here's a pathway to peace, right? If you feel, because we also have to acknowledge that some days don't nothing feel like royalty. I've experienced some days I don't feel nothing like a king. I feel heartbroken. I feel unremembered. I feel otherized, right? That don't feel like royalty. But then you have to get into like further proverbial messages of what the crown is worth and how it weighs and heavy is the head. You get into all these different things. But this language has become part of like my pedagogy, who I am, how I show up for the young people, and how I call them back to remember a part of themselves. Especially when the world calls them otherwise.
Woo! Woo! Source of light, developing a source of light, brother. So if you don't know, soul development is a force, not just musically and sonically, but also through sound. Real activism, real love is transmitted through the instruments that they play, through their voices. Real movement, like what this brother is saying here now. He says in rhyme, in cadence, with rhythm, on tracks that sounds so ferocious. So look, we could just have spent the whole 2 hours on soul development. I'm giving you their Instagram tags. I'm giving you the hashtag so you could find other images, and in the chat, we'll give you opportunities to have access to the music, not only of Karega Bailey, but also of soul development. But we want to show this video because this video is hot. It kind of captures soul development in action, in power. And we want to give Karega like 3 minutes to breathe and not have to be on camera, you know, just a moment for breath. And then we're going to come back and talk about healing-centered pedagogy. So I give you helicopters.
Up there for it now.
Which way are they facing?
At least one, they're facing westbound. This guy's still walking.
Teachers, preachers, knowledge seekers, lawyers, doctors. They tell you lock your doors, your stores, and hide your sons and daughters. But we are here to bring the truth with that they have a problem. And we running from helicopters, helicopters. And we running from helicopters, in helicopters. And we running from helicopters, helicopters. And we running from helicopters.
Yo, picture me rolling in a slave ship that was stolen. To my homeland I am going, leaving land that was stolen. This freedom ain't no freedom and you know it. And cops don't pull the trigger in the moment. You just another nigga in that moment. You about to be a victim in the moment. Hashtag with your picture in the moment. The moment that the athletes say that Black Lives Matter, Twitter quick to call a nigga in that moment. This shit is for real. Too late to be safe, so I say what I feel. Too hurt to be fake, so I say what is real. You cannot relate to what black people feel, cause you don't understand, that don't make it less real. Too stuck in your head when your heart needs to feel. This pain that we carry is real. Pressure is building for real. This ain't no movie or real. This pressure will kill.
Helicopter, helicopter over my head. I see them lights, they flashing blue and then red. They chase us down the street and they shooting us dead. Cause they don't understand that we are more than they said, more than they said. And we running from helicopters, helicopters. And we running from helicopters, in helicopters. And we running from helicopters, helicopters. And we running from helicopters.
Shit, I'm tired of ducking from them helicopters. I know they plotting, trying to bomb us while the world watching. Be more than Ferguson, them devils ain't got shit to prove. 1985, Philly dropped the bomb on move. If you running and they gunning, better know the rules. Same root, same noose, same strange fruit. Same clan, same bad, same aim to feel you, then they frame you. Kill you, then they blame you. Whoa, gotta watch out for the blames too. My prayers go to Syria, we say your names too. Cause the same hate that we've been facing is the same hate that bombed their nation, but they don't hear me though. Show me a place where it's safe for our kids to grow. The cop shot to me and Rice at 11 years old. And I'm not saying it's the same thing, I just understand the trauma that the pain brings. Peace, gay?
Exactly.
Helicopter, helicopter over my head. I see them lights, they flashing blue and that red. They chase us down the street and they shooting us dead. Cause they don't understand that we are more than they said, more than they said. No more than the fear that you carry. We are more than the black lives you bury. We are more than anything you could dream, which is probably the reason why these helicopters chasing me.
traffic yet.
Welcome back. Welcome back. That was Helicopters by Soul Development. A lot of what we talked about in this first half of our discussion was present in that video, from Peace King to the rose in the concrete to the young people being embraced and being part of the solution. Really critical, really, really beautiful piece of art. And I think it's a great transition for where we want to take the conversation now. But before we make that moment, if you have questions that you want to ask, you can put them in the Q&A. Candace will go through them, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. If you put the questions in the chat, they may or may not get directly addressed. So that's just a message for you. We're here with Karega Bailey, artist, activist, author, educator, husband, father, storyteller, so many projects that he's led or you know, kind of facilitated. It's hard to like capture it all in one moment. We could have just focused on one. We could have just do one. But I also think that it's important, this artist, activist, author, educator is really interesting, kind of 4 quadrants. You know, they all are directly related to each other. And author in particular, I think is powerful because you've been doing so much writing. And Dr. Maisha Wynn, who is the editor of the book on restorative justice and education, she talks about the importance of language, that language invites stakeholders to consider how the language and discourses we use can build relationships, trust, compassion, and dignity. They can also destroy relationships, undermine trust, right? They can also not build dignity, but actually dehumanize. And I think that was highlighted in what we were just talking about in terms of Peace King. This idea of reaffirming identity with new language, providing new nomenclature for people to see themselves. And it kind of corresponds to the work of Dr. Shawn Ginwright, who is trying to move us away from this idea of seeing children as being at risk, move us away from this trauma-informed teaching, trauma-informed pedagogy, to more of a healing-centered pedagogy that moves us more to not only the practice of healing the young people who are experiencing the trauma, but also healing ourselves. And I think that that's also critical. It's not just that somebody else needs to be healed, but I need to be healed. And so, you know, Dr. Ginwright talks about healing-centered as being explicitly political rather than clinical, culturally grounded, asset-driven, and in support of providers in their own healing, I think is critical. Supportive of providers in their own healing. That means you. That means you as a practitioner, you as a teacher, you as a youth development professional, that healing-centered pedagogy is not just about what you're able to do for others, but it's also about how you heal within yourself. This bottom corner gives you kind of 4 examples, 4 kind of models for how healing-centered pedagogy works. And we've talked, Karega has been able to share with us in his practice examples of these things, examples of healing circle, you know, examples of building coalitions with young people in advocacy, peer-to-peer education. You know, we just showed you his examples of artistic engagement, not only with youth, but also creating art that in and of itself is a tool for advocacy, expression, and connection. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about like your own personal healing journey, and let's kind of reflect on it in a way that other people can overcome those things that get in the way of them being restorative towards the young people that they're engaging, because there's so much going on inside that they can't really find that healing. And I'll just leave it there.
As we come back to this conversation, I just again have to take a deep breath of gratitude, as a regular practice, but also as just a space for all of us to take a deep breath. Adari, I'm so grateful. I'm so honored to have a synopsis of the work that I've been called to do in this way. We are like, this conversation feels like we're eating the fruit from a tree. But if you know anything about education, the amount of trauma I endured in said spaces, the amount of deep inquiry and tears shed, overall, just for my wellness otherwise. So it feels really beautiful to be able to come here and have a healing center practice from some of the spaces that I felt pushed on. Some days I felt like I was holding up the building. Some days I felt pushed out the building. You dig what I'm saying? And this is too common of an experience for Black educators. And then we exist in this space where now our wellness is compromised and we aren't functioning at the capacity in which we desire. I asked the question earlier, who are you when you're offended? Right? That's really the person who we're working on. And if we on a continuum put on the jacket of offense, because here's how offense works. If someone says something to you who you feel otherwise has no ability to or merit to deliver on that offensive thing, or you think that they're not cognitively present, you won't even register it as an offense, right? You will decide in your mind there's no weight to what they said and it rolls off. Offense works when you choose to put it on. Somebody says something from a space that had you vulnerable, and what they said got in. And at that time, you have to choose to take off love as your armor, and you put on offense as armor. Well, that's no real armor, right? Love is the greatest armor, but sometimes we disarm ourselves and we choose to put on offense. And when we do that, we don't think in our fullest self. We are incapable of remembering our deepest medicine. We are incapable of really operating in grace. We won't count it as grace. We'll count it as a warning. That's a warning for your ass, right? And a warning and grace are two different things. And we think.
It's so interesting because, we both have babies. So, your baby will scream, wake you up in the middle of the night. You loving this baby. You giving this baby love. They screaming in your face. They throw up on you. You know what I mean? You got to change their diapers 2:30 in the morning. You give them so much grace to offend you.
Yes.
If grown people did what babies do to us as dads, we would live in offense. It's hard to love somebody.
I thought you were describing my morning, right? That's how my morning went. And on the break, I went inside to look for her, to tell her what I was doing. She's only 2 months. To tell her what I was doing, to give her a kiss and let her know I'll be back, right? Because she's on my mind that much. But as we look at like that relationship between how we parent, how we show up, I also know that something happens along the parenting spectrum where we sometimes lose that grace. But I bring all this up to say, healing ourselves, the work, I don't know who we think we are, if there is a version of us that can exist to be of service to young people, and we're supposed to teach them, and somehow they don't teach us. I've never seen a learning space that looks that way, right? Otherwise, it isn't truly learning if we can't learn from our young people. But along the path of healing myself, like you said, I did a lot of writing. I still do a lot of writing. And I'm so grateful that I never lost the desire to write. I want to give a shout out to Carmen Rio Bailey. She was a professor I had in grad school. And listen to me, y'all, this is the truth. I'm in grad school and I'm participating in one of the special education courses, but I got this poem that I'm working on, this rhyme, and I cannot stop writing it. I cannot stop. So in between my notes, I'm synthesizing, but that's because I had no therapeutic outlets for the trauma that I was working in as a school setting. And that was my way of synthesizing my lived experiences, talking about what I learned from my students. So it's end of the night one night, and we're on the elevator, and she's like, "So can I hear what you're working on?" I was like, "What you talking about?" And she was like, "I don't know if you were writing rhymes or poetry, but I want to hear it." And I said, "Oh shit, Carmen." Right. So we're still tight till this day. But she in the grad school setting, she saw that I was adding value, I was synthesizing. And because my placement was unlike anywhere in the United States, y'all, I was in a school in Southeast DC that was designed for students who had the emotional disturbance of the classification of emotional disturbance. One, that's not even legal by IDEA. But two, it was like this moment in time that never has been replicated, and I pray will never be replicated. But I learned so much from that time. I kept writing. Um, you'll hear me talk a lot about love, not as a theoretical construct, but as a practice, and as something we must be bringing ourselves to daily. You wake up to the altar daily, you close your eyes with it daily, you measure love. I do this because I've experienced so much grief. I talked about my brother in 2014. In September 30th, 2019, after a wonderful 41-week pregnancy, my wife and I experienced the double transition of our firstborn daughter, Kamayu Soul. Um, and experiencing this double transition with without a fear, like we never had a worry. Um, but I think what was most profound was in the days after, in the depth of the grief. Um, this is why belonging is so important. This community did something remarkable. Like the way people found to show up in love, it was clear to me that like, oh, this is the mark of humanity. This is what we're working toward. We're working toward love. It's nothing else matters. And I've seen life on term enough time to know that we only talk about the love and the love that we created that lasted in the pathways. So this process, I want to read this affirmation really quick from Soul Affirmations. Soul Affirmations is a text that I created. This is the result of like 5 years of journaling, synthesized into an affirmation toolkit. I read my journal entries. I asked myself what was the essential things coming from this journaling. And here's an affirmation that I want to chat. I want to invite every educator to have. There'll be a link up to where you can get it, but check this one out. On page 16, it reads, "Love as a philosophy is much easier than love as a practice." Ooh. Love as a philosophy is much easier than love as a practice. But when we choose to practice love, it will challenge our philosophy and change the way we respond to what challenges us. But when we choose to practice love, it will challenge our philosophy and change the way we respond to what challenges us. Today, I choose to practice love. So I was probably in like year 6 of my work when I realized, oh, I'm a practitioner of love. Organizational language matters, right? Language matters. If a school isn't centered on love, somebody who's asking the essential question of how are we loving, how is it showing up for our young people? Not just in the way we say, because now when you get into intimate relationships, you realize you can't just love the way you love. You got to love the way your partner receives love, right?
Ooh.
So
Say
why
that again.
you can't just love the way you love? You got to love the way your partner receives love. And I know this to be true about all practices of love, including the way we love our children and our students and our young people. And when the young people in our lives become our young people and not somebody else's, the responsibility of love becomes that much more inherent. So I realized quickly that the language that I was using, who I would show up as, and it was particularly a beautiful juxtaposition in my size, in what they're used to seeing from Black men who look like me. But all I was interested in was showing love. How can I model it enough for you to pick it up? Because we need it in this space. Not love as in the philosophy of love, the spoken value of love, but the love that requires us to challenge our philosophy and change the way we respond to what challenges us. Change the way we respond to what challenges us. That is the deeper role in restorative work. So now I'm getting at the essential. Oh, this is a human need, right? If we can change the way we respond to what challenges us, we in this capacity, we become a new version of ourselves. I believe that challenges, adversity, grief, they are dimensions, they are invitations to new dimensions of love, right? And we can stay in the same loop, the same circuit of love. I'm going to do these 5 exercises because this is the exercises I know how to do. But outside your circuit of familiarity, there's a massive amount of love waiting for you to explore it, to let it into your heart, to let it into your thinking, to let it in the way we show up for each other, let it the way show up in the way we show up for our partners, our family, especially how we bridge across difference. It blew my mind when I was no longer willing to, like, I didn't have the shout in me. When these atrocities happened in the pandemic, when we saw the loss of Black life, um, and I had already experienced activism at every level, right? Street side, corner side, publication, shutdown, stand up. We endured all those things. And I asked myself, what is it really requiring of me? What's required of me right now? Right? And it was how much love I could not let the circumstance take from me. They can't take my love. My love is my armor. That is my power. That I am in abundance when I'm in love. When I say living in the frequency of love, that is the side of abundance. Our offense does not have nearly as much power. A grudge does not have the same power love has, although posed as power. A grudge isn't power. And many of us actually, when we otherize the young people, we are informing this grudge within us. Have you ever heard that toxic staff room conversation, right? Especially when I know the student is a live wire and right now he's pressing on everybody's button. I know that. I've been there, right? I've seen the students press on everybody's button. Um, but what happened in this work is, what are they challenging us? Are they challenging us to love a new dimension? If we show that we cannot be broken in this space, what are we showing them? What belonging? We're modeling belonging at a level they have never seen. So this has become the work, and I don't know how to show up in education. I don't know how to. What the shirt say? Black love is Black liberation. The idea of Juneteenth or any liberation or any freedom, it is inseparable from the practice of love for me. I have not found a political agency, a bill of legislation that has changed the hearts of people. Even when we change their behavior by making them comply with law, if the offense is still in their heart, you'll feel it when you walk in a room. This is why we still have to create safe Black spaces, right? Like, no matter what the legislation says, we have to create safe Black spaces because we know not everybody has safety in their hearts toward us. So love is the work that I'm pressing on. It is the side that I'm on. It is the work that I'm creating in my heart. When the affirmation tells us, today I will practice love by showing compassion to people or spaces often overlooked or intentionally silenced. Right? The last one, the last affirmation in this text is on page 66. Today I will practice love by showing compassion to people or spaces often overlooked or intentionally silenced. So this exercise makes us think about, how do I take whatever privilege I have right now of love? How do I take this privilege and make room for somebody else? Because you ain't talking in it unless it's abundant. Love makes room. Love makes room. Love does not have to exclude. Love does not need ego. Love does not need exclusivity. The truest form of love knows how to include all, right? And difference doesn't mean deficit. Difference does not mean deficit. It's the opportunity for bridge building. It's an opportunity for us to learn from love just how far it can go, right? When we reach across difference. So, but we also know that, like, difference can be in the Black experience. We're not a monolith. So that we have several different approaches to this better life we're all imagining. And I'm so dedicated and willing to show up to Black spaces where we learn to bridge across our difference of experiences and philosophy for the better of all of our children. Hadar, you wrote me about our children growing up in the parks together, right? About playing in the parks together. Uh, and suddenly you realize that, damn, it's not, I'm not in a vacuum. I need to know your parents. I need to know that they are well. I need to make sure that y'all got groceries, right? Because that's going to inform the way you play. Children who have their needs met play differently than children who don't have their needs met. Because where is grace going to show up, right? That's the difference between I wish you would, right? That's the difference between I wish you would and talk to me. What's happening? What's going on, bro? Why you feeling that way, right? Because you can't take my love away. If I have an abundance of it, your action can't take it from it. Difference doesn't mean deficit. But we have educators, y'all, whole adults who have whole degrees, whole sophisticated lives and sophisticated romance lives. But when it comes on to their children in the classrooms, they have grown a callous. And it hurts me. And I can't judge the adult who behaves that way. Otherwise, I otherize them. Right? And they can't hear from me if I'm showing up in love. And I can't front. I've otherized some adults, right? When I thought your game was whack in my early career, when I thought your game was whack and you was only causing more harm, man, I might have cold shouldered you so good in that building because I didn't recognize what was coming out of your space. But I also never build a bridge to figure out where your deficits are on your needs. And maybe if I can help show up there, then you can take some of this medicine. Because ultimately, I need you to be well for all children to be well. Because if I have to take on double the occupancy of students, then now I am decreasing the quality of education, time, and attention they're receiving. So just because my space is functioning well and I have a capacity to have my instruction going and my classrooms operating and my stations are going, if my neighbor, if my teacher next door isn't doing well, it isn't an indicator that I am better and I am outperforming you. No, it means the children in that space aren't well. So I got to get off of my ego or however I'm performing well or my evaluations are going good. And I have to learn how to love the neighbor who isn't performing as well as me. Damn, that's a big ask, right? That's a big ask.
It's a huge ask, but I think what you're affirming in all of our identities as youth development professionals, as educators, is that it's a team game. It's not an individual game. And in this context, because so often we're talking about institutions and sort of institutional justice, institutional practice, a systematic practice. We're not talking like you're not Aristotle, who's just, tutoring one child for your whole life, right? And that you're that child's teacher, that child is your student, and that's the relationship. But no, this system requires a team game. It requires a kid to go to one institution, perhaps all day in the morning and afternoon, and then go to another institution in the early evening. You might hit practice after the after school program. That's a third institution. Then you got to be yourself best when you come back home. So every day you're navigating 4 different institutions. And if
commuting and your family lives cities away from the school of opportunity, so how you get out the door is now going to impact how you get dropped off at school, because now if you got mom late, if you got dad late, that's not a comfortable ride, right? And I've seen those at drop-offs. So I got to home. Yeah, so I got to catch that, right? And this is why we created the audio experience of Soul Affirmations. When I realized that the parents needed their love portion filled the same way the students did, and I needed them to be on the same language, but parenthood may not always look like I have time to read a chapter a night. I know these are ideal things we want, but sometimes parenthood hasn't looked like that for me. So Felicia and I created the audio experience. So now families can spend time together and commute, all being affirmed and creating that family agreement, right? Then we created the podcast. Oh, if you up on a late night, the children are down, and you want to intersect, you want to investigate the practice of love from multiple intersections. Well, now there's a learning community that's happening there. My work since becoming an angel parent, right, is more clear and more concise than it's ever been. And my work is simply so that we may all love more abundantly. That is the legacy I am comfortable leaving for the children. That is the legacy I'm comfortable leaving for my family name. If I am on the side of love, pushing us to love more abundantly in every way, belongingness will be a byproduct. Community will be a byproduct of the love. But we keep otherizing people who we keep thinking don't deserve the love. And that is harming us. Because every time we otherize them, right, they more susceptible to run up in your house. Because you're not me. I don't see myself in you. We don't see an extension of each other. So now it is more easy for me to cause harm to you because I don't see my other me. There is no in Lakesh. I don't see you as an extension of me. I'm not healed enough. There is not. I have things occupying love's territory. This whole work is about investigating what's occupying love's territory. And if I have anger, if I have resentment, if I have harm, if I have abandonment occupying love's territory, I do not see a reflection of me when I see you.
Powerful, powerful. We're talking to Karega Bailey, educator, author, restorative justice practitioner, justice seeker, lover. It's interesting, you know, I think to summarize what is restorative justice, to summarize what does it mean to have healing-centered practice, that to just summarize that in love, in the word love, is really powerful and probably you know, that kind of nomenclature is not common in school settings. It's not common in our youth development practice, but it's clear that it's our love for ourselves that makes us whole when we show up for our young people. It's our love for our community that makes us, you know, want to hold them accountable to the possibility of what our communities can be, of what they can be, and the contribution they can make, that they're actually making. And then kind of love captures what we want our young people to leave with every day, regardless of whether or not they're quote unquote doing well, whatever that means, regardless of whether or not they're achieving, whatever that means, that the achievement, the ultimate achievement for any school, for any learning community, for any youth development experience is, do the young people feel loved? Is it a place where they feel like there's love exists for them? That it's a place that's going to reduce harm, that's going to make them feel more welcome, like they belong more, like they're more comfortable, and all of that joy and love that they begin to reflect within themselves is actually going to manifest in their achievement, in the interactions with others, in their interactions with the adults, and hopefully even spill out to their interactions into the communities outside of the institutions that we work for, outside of the places where we practice. And the word practice, I think, is important.
Yeah.
It's important for schools and youth development organizations, activists, artists, educators. When we're working with young people, we're practicing. Like, the game is not your class. The game is life. Your class is practice. Like, the game is not your program. Your program is practice for the actual game that they have to go out and live every single day. Like, you're supposed to be creating a safe, healthy environment for people to practice becoming their best selves, to see their best self, to interact with their best self, to use their best language, to make their best step forward. And they can't do that if the people who are facilitating that or who are directing that are in fact overwhelmed by harm and by hate.
I know about to go in this video, but check this out. You talked about the love, and we want to lead with love, and we need our educators to be filled with it. I want to give everybody on this call a quick hack on how love can actually become part of schools. Okay, I know we left it out, but here's how you can make it deliverable and a part of your school. Okay, massive grief calls for massive love. Okay, massive grief calls for massive love. The presentation in the beginning looked at the data of the way Black and Latinx students are experiencing the pandemic. So not only have they passed, their siblings, cousins, otherwise coaches, mothers, fathers passed, right? So we have to understand that, like, schools as we know it aren't what we're coming back to. We have to acknowledge the massive grief. When Columbine experienced the shooting, they had increased counselors and grief counselors for up to a decade after the shooting. Okay? We just saw a global pandemic. If we cannot armor our schools with more clinicians and people to help make that work, we can at least start to embed love in our practice, because grief calls for love. So if we know we have this much loss, we have to include love and gentleness into our pedagogy and what's showing up. That gives you license to bring it up in your school, and no one will get tired of you, right? Until we figure out how to make it in our mission, in our rollout, but keep bringing it up in your learning spaces that they need love. We need love. We just experienced massive grief, and if we ignore that grief, my God, that is classifiable of abuse, right? So if we're mandated reporters, we have to report ourselves. If we neglect that.
I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute. We'd love to get to those questions. And Candace, do you have some things to share with us?
Absolutely. Wow. I've been in here just like in church, just like, and I have a baby in my arms at this time because he's decided that he is no longer going to accept us being in this meeting. So talk about love, right?
Somebody says something. Let's go.
Let's go. So let's look at these questions, but I want to highlight the what was so deeply profound to me was the idea that our educational spaces have to be filled with love. And I remember Mama Erica Huggins, when we asked her, what makes for a learning environment that is healthy and whole and rich for Black children, and she said love. So you've got to love these children. And especially, and what I loved about what you said, Karega, was especially when they're not on point, especially when they're tapping on your very, very last nerve. You have got to love them. And so I really appreciate you saying that, because I think we oftentimes, they get so much on our nerves that we forget that part. We forget all of the root causes of why they're tap dancing on your nerves in the first place. And we've got to remember those things. But I want to get to folks' questions, but that was just deeply moving to me. And as a parent too, I'm like thinking about how difficult my morning was we had with our 2-year-old, and how differently we need to approach him in those moments. But we have a question. What are some ways to draw out in young people who they are when they're offended? So you talked about who you are when you're offended is the place where you need to put that work in. So this question is, how do we help them find that?
I would age specific. I think that 2 ways I would like to approach this is to make real time. Like if we're talking about our classroom agreements, right? We can make language in reference to offense, right? Like for example, I will make a honest effort to not put on the jacket of offense. So we can have a whole lesson about what the jacket of offense is and why when we put that on, how we're not really in our superpower, right? Love is a superpower, offense isn't, anger isn't. But so we could operationalize it as a part of our classroom culture, so we're always investigating it, because I don't know a one lesson approach on this work, because I work on love for a living, and cut me off in traffic and see if I remember anything of what I remember, right? I'm still a work in progress. You dig what I'm saying? Like, so there isn't one lesson that does it. It has to become part of the culture of that classroom, right? And when we start looking at across like offense, difference doesn't mean deficit. Introducing these operationally, because we'll always have to come back to it. And it's a great reminder for the educator in the room, right? Because when you look up at them agreements and you offended, but it's not the power. You're not working in your power when you are. So that's one way I think of introducing it. I think in let's just say a 3rd grade setting, what does it look like? That might look like circle time. We bring it up. We bring up examples of it. We bring up so examples and non-examples, right? And we bring up times, and we celebrate young people who could have been offended and chose to look past it, right? We want to celebrate those who are able to show grace.
All right, hold on.
if we make grace, if we make grace a part of like a celebrated classroom culture norm, right? Uh, but not in a way that like I did this for you, so that makes me this, right? It doesn't work that way. But it's a young person who chooses to look past the fence, a young person who chooses to look past somebody knocking their jacket off the back of their chair, a young, all age specific. But I just think like we have to embed it regularly in the culture. There isn't one lesson to do it.
Yeah, I think that that's powerful. I think healing starts with you first. So, as the practitioner, as the professional, kind of embedding the practice of love in your own practice, the embedding those affirmations in your own practice, not just when you wake up in the morning, but before you go into that moment of discipline, you have something that you can say to yourself that puts you on point and reminds you of what syllable to emphasize and what syllable not to emphasize. And I also think this question about who are you when you're offended, that's as relevant for the educator who's leading that experience as it is for the young people. So I would say before you ask the young people who they are when they're offended, ask yourself first, who are you?
First.
And then deconstruct that, interrogate that. And the more that you can interrogate that and begin to replace your commonly used language of harm and of offense and move that language more to love and possibility, I think that's how you move away from kind of punitive communication practices, punitive teaching practices, punitive discipline practices, like what we call in American public education, compulsory practices, or practices of fugitivity, practices of liberation, practices of possibility and opportunity. And that is like a love-hate thing. It's like we are trained as teachers and educators to kind of remove emotion from our objective practice of being a teacher. And what I hear is that the emotion of love is a generative power. It is a force within your practice that can transform not only the outcomes, but also the relationships, the in-betweens. So not just the outcomes, but also the in-betweens, which I just think is critical. And the last thing I want to say about that is you talked about the third graders, the young people kind of getting into this practice of finding out who they are when they offense. For the older people, I feel like Karega gave a number of different tips within his own practice, like journaling, responding to open-ended questions about the self, interrogating the self, the practice of meditating and reflecting on the self. That's something for a middle school student. That's something valuable for high school students. And that's something incredibly valuable for youth development practitioners.
First and foremost, to thine own self be true, right? There is no game, there's no wand. It's all the work that you put in on yourself, and your young people will see that, and they'll see the way you treat yourself, and then you can begin to ask of them to show up in ways that they see you show up. But don't dare ask a young person to show up in a way that you ain't willing to show up, right? Because you're gonna get exhausted.
Absolutely. And it always starts with you. You are the first place where that practice needs to be put into place. Our last question is, how do educators call out the familial toxicity our young people experience, and where should they go and where they should go or navigate through these types of relationships? So basically, if a young person is dealing with toxic familial relationships or situations, how do we help them deal with that? And it says call out, so I'm assuming this is about like dealing with the families.
Well, yeah. So I'm also curious. Before we call out the family, have we called the family in? Right? Have we called the family in? Do we know this family? Are we building relationships of trustworthiness with the family? Soul affirmations, uniquely enough, I thought I was writing it for the families, and it became for the students first, and then it went to the families. But what I'm saying is, this helped me create agreeable language so that the parents knew what I would be saying to the young people, so they can have an example of some things they can say to create a consistency between the two worlds. But I think before I know there is harmful behavior, but in the humanizing lens first, remember that every parent is doing the best they can under the circumstances. And if you say, well, no, that they're harming them, well, that's under the circumstances. There is incredible fatigue in being a parent. There's great stress in being a parent. There's great stress in being a parent who sometimes feel like you can't provide. There's great stress in being a parent who sometimes feel under resourced or underemployed or even underloved. So my frame of thinking has always been this. I will not invalidate a family's love for their young person, no matter what their young person shows up as, right? But if there's like violation of safety, right? Well, then there isn't much of a question because you know what you're supposed to do. So I don't know if this was like a violation of safety or something that we're judging the family for. And I just think it's incredibly difficult to judge a family, period. Because if we are judging, we're not loving. You can't judge and love at the same time, right? And some people, it takes more labor to look at the circumstances than it does to look at the behavior, right? But if we concern ourselves with the circumstances, we might find why that adult from the other end of you is worth humanizing and building a relationship with, right? I've had instances where parents were causing harm, and it didn't include a wellness check from Child Welfare Services. It included me building a trustworthy relationship to say, hey, look, this is how so and so is being impacted by what's happening in the house, right? It's not even a judge thing. You let me know if there's a role I can play to assist in you all's overall wellness. Because what I can do, I'm recognizing that you're trying. The fact that you even answer my phone call right now, show me that you're trying. The fact that you even here right now, I recognize you're trying. I know we commute across 3 cities, right? I know you're late sometimes, but like I see you trying, and I value that. And having a parent on the other end who feels valued and seen for whatever level of effort they have available to give, that's the parent that's going to be on your team versus somebody who's not answering calls, not coming to pick up, don't care about a suspension, expulsion, or otherwise. We got to love the whole family, not just the student.
Yeah, and that to that point, there are many resources to help us develop healing-centered practices, and ourselves, our parents, and the young people that we're teaching are the primary resources. Like they're the first. Building love and strengthening the relationships between educators and the young people they educate and the parents of those young people, that's like the ultimate resource. There are also book resources. Here's some. Scholars have been writing about restorative practices. Scholars have been writing about what justice can look like, what how schools and programs can be made to succeed for Black students. Great folks like Shawn Ginwright, Maisha Wynn, Savannah Shange, this fugitive pedagogy by Jarvis Gibbons, who also wrote the book about the African American Male Achievement Initiative. Like there are scholars out there writing about this. There are resources for folks outside of this conversation where you can get more in depth into the practice of healing and what Bettina Love says, doing more than just surviving. Bettina Love is our next guest. So we had Bettina Love with us a year ago, and she's coming back for part 2 of our conversation. We did a early in the pandemic conversation. Now this is a post-pandemic conversation with the legendary Bettina Love. And if you're not familiar with who she is, look her up. But the book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, is a testimony to not only the power of restoring love in our education relationships, but also seeing ourselves as abolitionists, abolishing the injustices that exist within the systems that we're operating, that we're present in. We went through any other questions that we have for Brother Karega before we sign off. We're really thankful. Man,
I'm hugely thankful. I'm hugely thankful. You know, it was grief that took me away from the school setting. And I didn't have the rich memory of all of these things that had happened before that life shift. And thank you for calling me back to the goodness of this work. Thank you for calling me back to the honor in this work. I value it, but that's just because I love the same way I observe the practice of love. I love Black people. I love Black children, and I know that our wellness is going to determine how well they are. You can't miss it. You can't be adult so long you adult supremacy and not realizing that no, this is the generation we need to be increasingly well, right? So it's out of the love for my people that this work is done on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and our appreciation for your work as a practitioner and as a scholar, you know. And I think for all of us, it's just important that we see examples of not only how this work can be made manifest in real time in the world, but also to gain insight into our own practice. What is it in our own practice that affirms healing? What is it in our own practice that sustains injustice? How can we extract that? How can we reimagine ourselves as educators in the process of reimagining schools? There is an evaluation form that I believe is in the link. We encourage you to fill that out. The evaluation form allows us to get better in this event and to invite guests that are as powerful and as relevant and as transformative as the work of Brother Karega Bailey. So please fill out that evaluation form. If you're looking for more information about Edutainment for Equity, or you want to know more about educating the Black child in our upcoming events, visit us at educatementforequity.com. Like I said, July 28th, our next guest is Bettina Love, and we have some really great guests coming up in the fall. I don't even want to tip my hand on that. Educating the Black Child is in partnership with the San Francisco Department of Children, Youth, and their Families. They're a primary sponsor of this event for the city of San Francisco. And I just want to say that San Francisco is doing a lot to elevate the conversation around Black children, Black families, around loving Black people. And if you're not engaged in those conversations, we encourage you to get on those conversations. Thank you so much for your time and energy. Thank you, Brother Karega. Woo!
Man, thank you. I really quickly, the Black Love episode that you had up there, you can find it on Oprah.com. That episode, that full-length episode is still up there. And I forgot to say, because there's been so much going on, you're right. I put a link up to a documentary called Dear Beloved. I also put up a link to an album called Dear Beloved that Soul Development and Be Imagined has been doing in the storytelling. Y'all, we just won an Emmy like 2 weeks ago, and I still haven't. That still doesn't even make sense to me right now, right? That like telling these stories from where they come from our people, has now placed us in this Emmy award-winning category. So just check out the documentary, hear from the mothers. I think they deserve as much space as Educating the Black Child. These are from mothers whose children are no longer here. And I think they can always help bring us back to love. So just check out that.
We should maybe work together to create an event where we can highlight some of those mothers and give people insight into that as well. It's hard to talk about educating the Black child without honoring the mothers from which they come. I say that as Candace is breastfeeding my little baby on the other side of the screen. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you so much, Brother Karega, for your wisdom and insight.